US, and you are here for the XBRL US webinar on XBRL beta APIs to extract, process, and create XBRL content. I'm going to walk through the agenda for today's presentation, and then I'll be turning it over to Campbell Pride, who's going to conduct the webinar. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the standardized XBRL APIs, what they are, what they do, what they're designed to do. We'll talk about how they factor into the XBRL US strategy, and then we'll get into the specifics of the XBRL US beta program. We will then demonstrate the APIs and show you how to access them, and we'll be reviewing the API documentation throughout that process to show you how to get started. So many of you have already signed on for the beta, which is great. We really appreciate that, but some of you may have not. So this will be an opportunity for everybody to learn, and for those of you who haven't signed on, we'll be showing you the link to the sign-on at the end of the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Campbell Pride.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so thank you for joining, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time. So today we're going to go through the standardized XBRL APIs that we've developed, and we'll just go through where you can get the documentation and also give you just a demo of just how it works, and just go through how you need to get it set up. So it's pretty hands-on. And also, if it gets, I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. We may get into a little bit of complex stuff near the end. So just to kick it off, so basically what we've developed is a standard open API just to enable easy, quick development of applications, and so make it easy for folks to be able to get access to XBRL content without having to go out, collect the XBRL data themselves, build XBRL databases, et cetera, and with the API we're showing today, at the moment, it's basically just got data from the SEC filing program, but the plan is to expand that as well, include other XBRL data that's being reported around the world. And so underneath that is the XBRL US database, which has a lot of data in it. And if you're interested, you can also get access to the XBRL US database, the actual database itself. In terms of, we have like a public database, which if you want, you can query that too. In some cases, the APIs are basically enable you to get information about XBRL taxonomies and the underlying data. But you may have, if you want to do more complicated queries against that data set, then you probably want to get access to the XBRL US database. So you can contact us about that. And then depending, you can get an individual membership, for example, and I think that's relatively inexpensive. And then that basically, we can give you all the database documentation, so you can get access to that as well. So why are we doing this? We're trying to improve the ease of use in working with XBRL formatted data, and which is produced with any taxonomy, and try and do this in a very standardized and structured way, so that it basically, one, will give you an introduction to XBRL without having to really learn necessarily all the complexities of it, and also basically put the data in a structure which is easy for a developer to be able to access it without having to learn the XBRL specification. And then it should hopefully make it easier to develop applications using XBRL data, as what I said earlier, without the need to go and work out how to acquire the data, work out how to normalize the data in some extent, and also to have to manage a database and make sure you've got all the data in that database. The intent of the API is that you can take it, you could use it, and if you want to collect the data and you want to use that same standard API, you're free to do that as well. So really the overall objective is to be able to, is to make sure that people have a roadmap to follow, so if they want to use this type of information, they can do it easily. So Michelle, if we go to the next slide, please. So XBRL today, so XBRL is used widely around the world. I think there's over 60 regulators collecting data in an XBRL format, and that data can be accessed. Obviously, there's lots of information. For example, in the UK, every private company is reporting in XBRL. In the US, companies are reporting both to the FDIC, which is a bank regulator, and to the SEC. All of this data is publicly available, but plus there are regulators in individual countries which are also collecting this data: Israel, Korea, Japan, Russia, China, etc., India. Some jurisdictions make that data freely available, others charge for it, but generally a large portion of that data is accessible. Next slide, please, Michelle. And some of the challenges, obviously, in terms of the standard is, there's this, in the US in particular, there's a deregulation initiatives going on, and obviously one of the things we want to make sure is that XBRL is seen as a way to make regulation way more efficient. So the API helps to support that, and basically makes data that's collected by regulators a lot more useful than it would be. So obviously one of the things we want to do is try and cut off the efforts to make data less available, but make data easy to collect, but then also easy to disseminate and use. Some of the other challenges we face is just inconsistencies in the data. Obviously, if people are reporting, we want that data to be as accurate as possible. The more people are looking at it, the easier it makes companies to basically comply with rules that have been issued, and to make the data better. So the more people looking at it, more people asking questions about it, which just drives improved quality. Obviously, we want to try and make it easier for people to access, so you don't have to be a technical whiz kid in XBRL to be able to access this data. It should be as simple as accessing any data at all. And also to just improve the body of knowledge of people who are aware of this data and all the different things it can be used for. Just as an example of that, a lot of this XBRL data was used for, there's a tax bill introduced in the United States. A lot of analysis was done using XBRL data, just to assess the impact of it and how it would impact individual companies. So from an XBRL perspective and an XBRL US strategy, one of the things we're looking to do is to bring more of this data and make it available to the marketplace in a way which makes it easy to use. You can access this data today just by directly going to regulators and downloading the XBRL filings. Now, in some cases, they're going to be in an XML format. The SEC is moving to something called inline XBRL, and this is basically where the XBRL is embedded in an HTML document, so you can access it that way. And then there's also initiatives to make XBRL available in a CSV format and in JSON formats as well. So there's various formats of this data that it can be in. So obviously one of the things we want to do is try and hide a lot of that, those underlying formats and differences in formats from users. So that's obviously one of the things that we're trying to develop. And so obviously in some cases you need software. There's open source software which also supports that. Then to the marketplace, things like rules processes. We want to be able to make sure that we have good rules in place so that the data, if we get feedback in terms of problems and data, that can be addressed. And then we have individual certificates. The open information model is really making XBRL data available in multiple formats, but the underlying data model is the same. Standard APIs, which we're going to talk about today, making sure that when taxonomies are they're developed in a standardized way, so the resulting data is consistent. Certifying taxonomies to make sure that we don't have taxonomies which are going to be incompatible everywhere else. Global database, we talked about this a little bit at the start. We were basically trying to take as much of this data in, so there's we can see some of the differences and people can start to be able to access that information. And one of the things that XBRL International is looking at is really a taxonomy registry. And we can talk about that a little bit at the end. They're looking at creating a central API, so if you want to get any information about the listing of what the taxonomies are, you can get that as well. So if we go to the next slide, Michelle. So one of the things we're starting off is this XBRL API beta program. So the timeline is today, this is a kickoff call. That's the call today, right now. March 21st, we'll be conducting a survey of beta users. March 28, second survey to beta users, and then in early April a launch. So obviously there's kinks and stuff that we want to work out, and issues. We can get that hopefully from feedback from people on the call today, and others who have expressed interest in using the API. And then we, just in terms of the commitment for that, is obviously to try and use the APIs and respond to the surveys if you can. And if there's any testimonials or any feedback you have, we really want to hear it, because obviously we want to make sure it's better. And if there's additional information or other things we should support, obviously we want to be able to hear about that as well. So if we go to the next slide. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll just go through some of the stuff. So the first thing we can take a look at is we'll have a look at the API database. There's a document on our website. If you go to our website, there is a document available which explains the API. And I think that's...
And Campbell, while you're pulling that up, I just want to mention to the audience that if you do have questions, please click on the Q&A link and submit your questions that way. And if you have any technical issues, email us at support@xbrl.us. We are recording this, and we will be posting this for members and others to access.
Thanks, Michelle. So the first thing we had just bring up is it will make this document's available on our website. This is a document basically explains the API. And if we go through this, there's basically, just to give you, I'm not going to go through the whole document here, but I just want to give you some idea of what's in here so you know where to look for stuff. Basically, it just gives an overview of the API, the structure, basically the information you can pull back. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, you can get factual data like facts in a filing or data that's been submitted in XBRL format, and then you can also get metadata, which is taxonomy data. It basically goes through how you structure the query parameters, and basically goes through each of the resources or the endpoints of the taxonomy. It has some functions in here. How you can control the sorting of records that comes back, if you want to put limits on the data that you get back, that kind of stuff. And it just basically goes through some of how you can search on data. The factual objects basically just describes this in a simple way. I have some diagrams in here, and this just describes the endpoints. You can get information about entities and about reports, and you get information about facts. And these are kind of tied together. So if you wanted to get information about an entity, then you get information about the report, then you get facts associated with a given report. So these kind of objects all kind of tied together. And then we just walk through, how you can write, how the API should be structured, what fields are available, and which fields that you can search on. And we'll get into this in a bit more detail in the examples. But basically, you can see there's quite a lot of information in here. Some terminology. You'll see DTS. That means discoverable. Well, that's a technical term, discoverable taxonomy set. But really, what that is what is the taxonomy that was used with the data that was filed. In the SEC program, for example, and this will differ depending on the filing program. In the SEC filing program, for example, every company creates their own little mini taxonomy, which is submitted with their filing. So you may be able to access those, and they really have what's a DTS ID. Whereas if it's someone who's filing to regulators and other regulators, typically they don't allow companies to create their own mini taxonomies. They just use the same schema. So basically, it's just really this is what this DTS is. It's just really the underlying metadata. And there's a report object. We just talk about the information getting about a report. And this is just really making information that we have available. This talks about nesting of facts. You have a report, may have multiple facts, etc. So it's just kind of these relationships. And the second part, so that's kind of like the factual data. Then we have the taxonomy object, and this is really allows you to basically be able to query a taxonomy, so you can get information about what the taxonomy is, you may have multiple, like in the database, there's basically a taxonomy for every single filing. So there's literally thousands of them. And then there's concepts, so you can get details about a concept. And that includes concepts in the US GAAP taxonomy, but that could be concepts defined by a company as well. What the labels associated with the concept is, what the references are, and then there's something called parts. So a reference part might be, this is a FASB reference, and then there may be it's line 23, subsection A, whatever, they're all parts. The other thing that has is in the taxonomy is the networks associated with a filing. So this may be how is information presented, or what's the order that it's presented in. Plus also it has things like what are the calculation relationships between elements. And it also has information associated with the dimensions. And then each of those relationships we have, this is the networks basically define what every individual network is. And you can think of that as like a separate graph. And then all the relationships that are contained in each network is also accessible via the API. So some of you are familiar with XBRL, you may have seen something like a taxonomy. If you looked at a taxonomy viewer, you should be able to build your own taxonomy viewer using the API, and then you should be able to basically use the API to basically render anything. Like you could render a company's extension or the US GAAP or IFRS filing. So you can use the API to do that with whatever front end you choose. The concept, basically this is information. How do I pull information about a concept? And this is what you can get, the concept details, its properties. In XBRL, concepts have things like, is it a monetary type? Is it a period? Is it in terms of, is this amount recorded over a duration, or is it a point in time? What's the namespace associated with it? What's the what balance types associated with it? Is it a debit or a credit, etc. And then labels and references. Each element can have a label associated with it. So this is just showing that you can pull that data back. One thing you'll notice with the API is it has a fields concept, so you can actually control what fields are returned as part of the query. So if you put in you basically just list back the properties that you want, or you can put the object name, and then it'll bring back all of that data. So it's kind of, if you're familiar with the Facebook API, it kind of works the same way. It's not. There's an API structure called QueryQL or GraphQL. So it's not quite that, but it's kind of similar in some ways. But what it allows you to do is to basically control the output that comes back from the API. So if there's only certain information you want, then that'll make it faster. When the API pulls this data back, if you ask for lots of data on a query, it could take a little bit longer because it's having to join in more data and get that data on the back end. There's information about the taxonomies, which we refer to as a DTS. So think of DTS as a taxonomy. We in a subsequent version of we may change DTS to taxonomy of the API, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then there's information, DTS fields. This is really information about the taxonomy, networks, etc. All of this is documented here. You can get this, you can go through it. But I just want to give you a structure of it. Basically, it's the fact data, and then it's the taxonomy data. In terms of paging, just how it's very simple. It's just limits and offsets. It also addresses the different error messages that you would expect to get back. And probably the most useful thing for the beta user program is in chapter 8 and chapter 9 and 10 of this document. It's just really the first thing to do is to get authenticated. Now, there's a couple of things you need to do. Is one, you need to get a client ID, and you can get that from our website. And that this tells you how to do it here as well. And then you need to be able to, basically the way that the API works in terms of it's using OAuth 2, so it requires a token to be submitted to the API so that it can return data. And so basically this just explains how that works, how you refresh it, how you make a request, how you construct one of these requests in terms of being able to get it. So there's a getting started section here, which will give you the links for everything you need to get going. So you need to request access to the BTI, to the beta program by filling out the form listed there. You need to log on and create an account. And then basically you go and you visit this page and it'll give you this client ID, which you'd use with with any application you develop. We have, just so you can start using it straight away, we've just made, just put a template file for Insomnia and made that available. So what this allows you to do is that you can start using the API automatically. You don't have to worry about going and building anything. And this just walks you through how to start using Insomnia. And this is what I'll show you for the example. But there's a template file. You can download that. You import that into Insomnia. And then you can start using the API once you've got a client ID and got yourself set up. So that's basically the documentation. You definitely need this. You want to get this. So maybe Michelle, is that link available? You know, there's a link here, but that's probably not much use. I think it's on our website. And
yeah, Campbell, when someone signs on for the beta, to join the beta, they fill out the form and then they receive an email that includes a link to the documentation.
Okay, great. All right, so do we have any questions so far, Michelle?
No, I don't think we have any questions. But again, just for those of you on the call, if you do have questions, click on the Q&A link and you'll be able to post a question, and and we could just take those throughout.
Okay. So moving on to the next part, I'll just go through the demo. So here's Insomnia here. Now, if you want to, this is open source software. We just use this because it's kind of easy to set up. It's commonly used software for basically testing your API and being able to see what your API is returning. This in itself is not an application. This is not a way that not a tool you should necessarily be using to get data. But this gives you a good way. We made this available so you can have some examples, and then you can start using the API with this if you wanted to. But it'll give you an idea. Really, what we want folks to do is to be able to take the API and build like simple applications to be able to start pulling the information. So the first thing you need to do is once you got this template, you download it. You'll get a template. And then you'll have an environment set up. So I've used this live environment. I use this for other stuff as well. And once you've got the live environment, basically the first thing you need to do, in this template, we have a request token. So basically what this does is it just goes and it requests a bearer token for the session. And so it's giving me a token. And with the template that you download, it basically sets it up so you can then once you've got it, Insomnia has it. So then any other requests, it'll basically go and pull that information. And you can see the URI here is https beta API XBRL.us. This is the request I did. It's just getting this token. So the first thing on here is metafact information. And this basically, if you look at the query for this, let's send this off. What this is doing is we've got a section here. It's just basically meta. And wherever you've got meta, you basically have, it basically just gives you information about the API. And I think if I get rid of the fact here, I should be able to, basically it just gives me information here. So we can see it basically just defines the different objects. And this was in the documentation we went through, but you can get information about facts, about concepts, about DTSs, which are taxonomies, labels, references, parts. These are all the objects. And you can see here, there's just links to each of these. So if we go to fact, this is basically going to give us all information about a fact. And all this is telling us, this is just really documentation of the API. So it basically tells you all the information you can get. I can get the balance type of a concept, the data type, its ID, et cetera, right? So this is basically everything about a concept. Now, sorry, about a fact. So this is the concept. So there's actually a lot on the fact object. And then there are some information here. If it's searchable as false, that means you can't search on it. But if it's true, then you can. So you can search on the unit, for example. And we'll show you how that works. So there's information for a fact. So down here, there's some examples. So here's some fact examples. So if I click on this one, so this basically just has the URL preview, but basically it's saying, okay, fact search, right? So this allows, you need to pass a search parameter, and there's multiple you can pass. So here we're going to pass a CIK, which is an entity identifier the SEC uses. I want assets. I want period, fiscal period. I want a year. I want a fiscal years of 2016, 2015, and 14. The fields attribute basically is used to basically tell me what are all the fields I want to get back. So I want to get fact.star, and what this means is it's basically going to give me every single property in the fact object. And then I further cut it down to something called fact ultimus, and it's got a value of 1. If you want to know what any of these mean, you can go back to the metafact information. And so we can look up fact ultimus, for example. Find it. Fact ultimus. So this basically is an integer that records the incarnation of the fact. The same fact is reported many times, and the ultimus field captures the incarnation that was reported. So a value of 1 indicates this is the latest value of a fact. A value of 6, for example, indicate that the value has been reported 6 times subsequently to this fact being reported. So basically the fact ultimus and the fact ultimus index, right, there's a slight difference between them, but they're basically the same thing. So if you want to get what was the latest fact that was reported, then that's going to, that'll give you, if you put the value 1 in there, it'll give you the latest. If you don't put that in, that's going to give you every single fact. So for example, I'll show you an example of that.
Campbell, while you're pulling up that example, I just want to mention to the audience that there seems to be a problem with the Q&A link on the platform that we're using, but you can post a question in the chat if you do have questions. So please use the chat, and that question will go to panelists. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. So I'm just going to, I've got this fact ultimus is equal to 1 here. So if I send the request, so this basically has come back, right? And so it's given me 3 records, and it's given me every single property for the fact that we have in the object, right? So there's a lot. But basically it's saying this is it. Here's the value. It's 491, blah, 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 etc. So if I wanted just to get the value, I could change this here. So it's fact.star, just change it to fact.value. This is only going to return 1 thing, which kind of would be a bit useless under normal circumstances, but and so here they are. So these are fact values. So I don't know what year it is, so it's kind of a little bit. It's not so good. So I probably want to know, well, which one's what. So I can do the fiscal period. Probably put that in as well. And these are just comma separated. Sorry, I've got to put the right value in.
Campbell, we have a couple of questions when you're ready, so just let me know.
Sure. So this is going to return these fiscal periods. You can see here, this is the year. We probably want actually the fiscal year. So this is going to tell us 2014, 15, 16. If I get rid of the ultimus, we don't put this in. If we deleted it, you'll see the difference. So then this is going to return the same value. The same value is repeated multiple times the reason for this is because this value has been reported in different reports. So the database basically keeps copies of every single time something was reported. So this particular company has reported the same fact multiple times. So let's go to a question then, Michelle. What do we got?
Sure, thanks, Campbell. First of all, one question that we received is the webinar being recorded? And yes, it is. So it'll be posted probably tomorrow. So the first other question that we received is what data sets are available via this API?
So at the moment, all the SEC data that's been reported since 2009 is available. So basically, that's kind of what we're starting with. So we basically have all of that information. So I think, I don't know, it's like 180 million pieces of data. We are looking at also loading in all the data for a couple of things for currently looking at. We want to get this done by the end of the year, is including all the FDIC data, and also we'd actually been getting some of the Form 13F data, which is security positions. That's not actually reported in XBRL, but we'd built an XBRL taxonomy for it. So we were thinking of putting that data in as well, which kind of people are interested in. And the other data we do want to get in is the UK data, which is the private company data. So we have a load process and we have that. The only issue with that is it's a large data set. So we want to kind of get the API out, see what people can use it. Start using it, and then if people want additional data, then we can take requests if there's other XBRL data. We'd prefer to use some of the smaller data sets if people have a preference, and put that in before we start putting the UK data in, which is a massive amount of information.
Thanks, Campbell. The next question we have is, can you show a text block fact value? Is that something that you can pull up with the APIs?
Sure. So let's I'm just going to take the concept name out. I think this is for a given CIK. Let's see what we've got here. Yeah, the text block data is in there. I'm not sure. I'll just change this 2016. And I think I'm just going to think of a text block. One of the things you need to know is what's the taxonomy. Let's just pull this up. I'm just going to make this a fact.star, and then I'll just work out what filing this is, and you can see how it works. So this is basically all assets information for a year. There should only be one record. And then, so for example, we have, this is the name of the company, but there's a report, should be a report ID on this. So it's a report ID. We could search, hey, I only want this report ID. Let's add another new name here. There are certain IDs here which don't really mean anything at the moment. We're trying to get these normalized and working with XBRL International to come up with a standard identifier for reports that can be used so that everyone, at the moment, this is just like an internal reference that's being used in the database. So we may want to change those at some point in the future as well. You can use them. You will notice somewhere we've also created hashes. So a hash is basically an MD5 hash, which is a canonical hash. We're trying to get those approved as well. So basically what these mean like the fact hash you see here, for example, basically if the same fact came in, it would have the same fact hash number, and it takes what is all the attributes of the fact, the standard XBRL attributes, and creates an MD5 hash out of them. So they should be the same across filings, but they should also be the same across databases. And that's something else we're working on with XBRL International, is just to standardize these hashes. So I'm just going to drop the local name of the assets here. So this should give us basically, let's take a bit of time. This is basically pulling back all the data. There's 422 records here, you can see. Let's just see if we've got one. Let's see if there's an example of a text block type here. I just don't know what ones they report it, but it'll kind of give you the idea. You'll see a big blob of text in here. Most of these text blocks are in an HTML5 format. I probably zoomed over it, but the answer is yes, you can get it. I was hoping I'd be able to show one. They may not.
Campbell, do you want me to give you some other questions while you're looking
let's
for
go.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we got a lot of questions.
Okay.
Okay, are the APIs open source? How do we use them from our own data set?
Well, yeah, they're open source, so you can access this data, you can use it, you can republish it, you can do whatever you want with it. How do you use it with your own data set? And really, that's just really a matter of up to you in how you can pull that data in.
Okay, and the next question kind of is a good follow-on to that. Is there a limitation in the number of requests and frequency of requests that can be sent to the API by one user? And I think this may be a good opportunity to talk about the difference between like the XBRL US database versus the APIs. Campbell, if you want to cover that.
Yeah, so at the API, at the moment, it's currently set that there's a limit on the amount of records that come back. Otherwise, you can just, if the API, if the request's poorly constructed, you can end up bringing back millions of records. So so it basically will automatically cut it at 1,000 records that would be requested. And then we haven't set a limit yet, but we're looking at setting a limit for how many requests can actually be made, but this is really more within the bounds of realistically. We used to have a previous API, and we were single users, could be making millions of requests. So we obviously don't want that, and that was just like slowing down. It's just large amounts of data for needlessly. And if you're in that situation where you want to get lots and lots of data, then you should really contact, they were basically trying to build a database. If you want to build a database by using the API to pull the data in, don't do that, because we can take a snapshot of the database we have and make that available to you.
There will also be a difference between access by non-members versus members. So that's something else that to be considered. And we haven't, as Campbell said, we haven't made the determination what that access break will be, but because we're still in the beta phase right now. But when this is officially launched in the spring, we will have those. We will have that nailed down and be able to tell you, as a member, you'll have this level of access. As a non-member, you'll have this level of access to the data. But the APIs themselves are open source and freely available. Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's see. Another question, can we create our own templates? What scripting language is this?
This is just the Insomnia scripting language that they have in their tool, but you can make your own templates. You can change it. You can do what you want. I don't know if you're familiar with Insomnia. You'll know that this is just standard Insomnia, and basically what's in here is just basically these are just straight URLs, and it allows you to be able to set some variables like I don't really have that, but in terms of the post request, you're going to put in your client ID. These you set up like a management file in here, and then you can where is this? You can manage your environment. So that then within that managing that environment, it basically has your password and everything else, and how that maps to these. And so this is the client ID that you're going to get back from us when you go to the website and set it up, and you can use name and password, which you can set. But this will all be set up, and you'll just need to drop those values in.
Okay, and then Campbell, another question. Is there a streaming API in order to be able to get real-time updates of the data? Once the data is published by the SEC, will it be automatically updated? And will it be automatically available in the API?
Yeah, so it's not like we have alerts or anything like that or anything on this. So, but what you do have is when someone makes a filing to the SEC, what happens in the background is once the filing goes to the SEC, it'll come up on there. We basically read an RSS feed that they make available. So once it hits that RSS feed, we're basically polling that RSS feed every 5 minutes. So once that hits the RSS feed, We poll, we see there's a new filing, we then basically run a load process which loads that into the database. Once it's in the database, it'll be available in the API. So theoretically, probably the longest time between a filing being made to the SEC and being available in the API would be like 15 minutes, but it may be sooner depending on when the load process picks it up. That could be, however, could, just so you know, that could be delayed during high filing seasons. You can have 1,000 filings come into the SEC within an hour. So the SEC gets bottlenecked up, and then once that goes on the RSS feed, we still have to load them, and it takes a few seconds to load each filing. So if it's 1,000 filings, then there can be, it may be longer than 15 minutes. And you'll see that with the SEC as well. They'll have filings coming in, and they may not all get processed till 6 or 7 o'clock at night at the SEC. So we can only take them as fast as the SEC can process them.
Great. Campbell, next question. Do any example data sets exist that relate to operational performance data, such as Six Sigma data?
Right, to Six Sigma data. I would have to, I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any. It really depends on the specific data set. So for example, in SEC filings, there is operational data, the SEC require for oil and gas companies, like things like reserves, how much oil, something, that kind of stuff. So it purely depends on what the requirements of what companies are filing is.
Okay, now the last question that we have at this point is, will this work with non-XBRL APIs? And I assume that means, will the database work with non-XBRL APIs? Actually, I'm not sure what that means now that I think of it.
I suppose this is a regular REST API, so this should work with any infrastructure that you're building, so you can pull that data in. In terms of the API itself, at the moment, it's not returning valid XBRL instances. Although we do have one entry point here for things like I'm just wondering where it is. There's a fact, and it's called an OIM, and that's the basically the object model for XBRL instances. So if you look at this is basically saying, hey, give me this for a given report, and so basically this data is coming back in an XBRL format. So basically this is an XBRL JSON format. So you can, I'm not sure if that's the question, but I'm just, you can get the data back. So this in theory, you could point an XBRL processor at this API, and then it can load it in XBRL. But the other stuff I was showing you, that's just straight JSON in the format that we've defined. And if the data is difficult to consume in that format, please let us know, because obviously we're trying to test this out, and if it doesn't work very well, then we can definitely change it.
Okay, and then a couple more questions. If we use the API for our own data, I assume our data has to reside in a standard database structure. So what is the standard database schema that this API can be applied to?
Yeah, so there's the underlying data structure of this that the API is using internal to us is based off the database that we have, which is basically based off the XBRL specification. And then the API basically takes that and then queries it and gives it back into the format that's available here. So it's if you've got the way that the underlying data is structured, and you'll see this through the API when you try to call the data, is it's very highly denormalized in a way, in the sense, or normalized in the sense that every single fact value is basically a separate row. So if you want to get any information, let's say you want to get information about a report, you're going to basically, every single value is going to be a different row. It's not like you have a report and you say, hey, here are all the values in a report. So if you're pulling this information from the API, you're going to have to basically depending on how you want to view it, restructure it. So you could think of this information as just basically, hey, give me a list of facts, and it's going to give you all the facts for, you know, for a given period, for a given entity. Or you could search for, hey, just give me all the facts for a given entity ever, whatever it may be. So the API is really just, it just really defines how you can pull back that factual data and that taxonomy data in a standard way. But the underlying model is very, very similar to the underlying XBRL model, which is really just about, I've got a fact, it's got these attributes on it, and what are the what are those attributes? So if you look here, we just pulled this data back, and so basically you can see it's just going to basically, everything's going to have a value. Most of them have an identifier. You know, how accurate's the number? You know, what's the concept associated with it? What's the entity? This is a CIK for a company. What unit is it measured in? This one's measured in US dollars. If it's a text block or a string, it's obviously not going to have a unit. And then this one has a dimension. It's saying, hey, it's a level 2. It's a level 2 cash and cash equivalent. What that means is it's cash and cash equivalents which are not entirely freely available. It's not like you can go get the cash out of the bank immediately. And then it's at this period. It's at the end of July. It's the 1st of July 2016. That's the balance this company had. So basically every single fact is going to have these as a minimum. So that's kind of the data structure, but in terms of the underlying structure, but in terms of the API itself, we provide a lot of other information about the fact. But that's just kind of information that we kind of chose because we had that data available. But if you looked at a pure XBRL data model, this is kind of what it would be.
Okay, great. We have some other questions. Hang on one second. Let's see. Is it possible to build additional business logic into the API, for instance, for getting certain management reports for internal company data use?
Yeah, so that would have to be done on the application side. So the API is just really giving you a way to get the data back and then to be able to do the analysis on it. We do have some stuff in the API. We do our own analysis of the data. So for example, we have a group called the Data Quality Group, and that basically, what that does is it basically runs business logic over the data, and then it comes back with observations. So we actually make that data available through the API as well. And it's just called assertions. I think we've got some here. Let's see. So this is basically representing, what is this one doing? This is, let me just take a little bit of time. Yeah, so this is basically saying, hey, we have something for non-neg items. We're saying certain items can't be negative. So then it's saying expected that the share-based compensation value will be reported with value equal. So it's basically saying, hey, we've got things that are 0. But these are things that this is business logic that we apply, but we've put that into the API as well, so that these can basically be run. But if you have your own business logic that you want to apply, there really isn't anything through the API at the moment that be available. We do have a processing logic engine that we run for the DQC rules. So the long-term goal is to make that available through the API as well. So you could build some business logic and then you could send that as a request to the API and get a result for a given filing. But that's not available at this point. If you want to do that kind of stuff, you could either get the data available from the API and then process it on site. The other thing is you could also it may be worthwhile approaching this about getting access to the database, and then you might be able to, because you may be wanting to push some of that processing into the database as well.
Campbell, the next question is, can this be used with corporate actions data?
In theory, it can be. We just haven't put any of the corporate actions data into the database yet. But that is, if people want to use that, we could definitely do that. Bank of New York and Citibank, they make corporate actions data available in XBRL format. We could load that if we want. If people are interested in that, we could load that in, and that data would be queryable through the API as well. Basically, the API will work with any XBRL data.
All right, and we've received another question. If we have instances and taxonomies other than using US standards, do the APIs work for them? And obviously, I think the answer to that is yes.
That's right.
Okay, where can the open source code for the API be accessed?
So at the moment, the underlying code hasn't been made available yet. But the underlying logic for how the API works is available, and that's obviously when you sign up. We're just making, obviously, we want to go through we haven't released the open source code at this point, but we plan to do that at some point in the next couple of months after we kind of get feedback from the beta users.
Okay, and the last question we have right now is, are you going to provide SDKs to ease the access to the API from different programming technologies? SDK, I'm not sure what that means.
No, standard development kits. Yeah, we're kind of looking at that for making some stuff available, obviously to make it easier to connect to the database. But I think what we would prefer to do is to make the code available on GitHub and have others develop that for all the particular environments they want to do it in. And obviously, if people are interested in helping us do that, we'd be very interested in hearing from you. And so, a lot of the underlying code that the API is currently written in is in PHP and Python. But we don't have, obviously, we haven't created classes for any other languages at this point.
Thank you, Campbell. That's all the questions that we have right now. If there's anything more that you want to show.
Yeah, I think a couple of other things just in terms of the information that's available. We can go through that. So there's facts, which we kind of looked at here. There is DTS examples. This is really pulling back information about a taxonomy, so you can get this kind of information as well. In this case, you can see, so this is information about the US GAAP 2009, 2011, 2012. These are basically all the taxonomies we basically have in the database at this point. You can see the majority of these are all the US GAAP, or the US GAAP items. DEI, which is one which is done by the SEC. So basically all of these taxonomies are loaded in here, so you can query those. I don't think the IFRS taxonomy is in here yet. We plan to do that the next week or two, is to get the IFRS taxonomy included. But you can see this it basically allows you to any of these taxonomies then, and any information in them can be queried. This is DTS information for, these are just the US GAAP ones, but you can access all the DTSs of every individual filing as well through the API. This here, you can also do, there's no data for this one. Yeah, I think I've got these set up with different DTS IDs, so you're not going to get any data back. You can see in the endpoint here, you can put in the specific DTS ID. These are internal to the database. I've switched database on this, so from the live environment, I'm not going to get anything. So, but if I was in, I think these are all set up for the test environment. I'll just go to that. You can see in Insomnia, you can set up these different environments that you can use. We have a couple of, this is our test API environment, but so. And you can see in these endpoints here, you can put in the DTS ID. Now, so for example, if you want to get a label for a specific concept, the labels can be different depending on different, in this test API, I should have really tested this before I got on it. I think we may be using it for something else at the moment, so it may be a little bit slow. But if you want to get a label for a concept, or you want to be able to get a information which is like references of a concept, they're gonna vary depending on. They're going to vary depending on which DTS you've used, because when a company files, they can change the labels on a given concept. So what that means is you can get different you can get different labels depending on the concept. So whenever you do a request for information about a concept, you're going to, which is a label or a reference, you have to provide a DTS identifier for it. So in this case, this is just basically giving you the references for assets. So just this is basically pulling back. You know, this is reference information for assets that's come back. So this is basically FASB references. It's also got, you know, this reference was modified when it was modified on, etc. So you have the ability to be able to pull all the stuff back through the API. Let's just go back to the live API. The other thing we have in here is entity information. So you can do things like filings for a specific filing. This is for this company, which is Accuray. This is basically gives you a list of, there's been 26 filings for this company. You can get all the details of that filing, you know, who did it, who helped them. You can get things like, or this is basically going to give you every single similar type thing. This is going to, if you look at the endpoint, it's going to say, hey, for this entity report, and I'm going to search on this entity ID. This is just basically giving me back all the details about the report. In this case, whereas the other one was a cut down, was basically the entity information. This one here, information about a specific entity. This is just giving me, this is going to give me information on that entity, basically what information we have there. So in the entity object, it's really what's the identifier for it, what's the name of the company, and what's its ticker. And then reports. This allows you to basically query on different types of reports. So this one here, for example, you can do, just show you how you can build these things up in different ways, but you can do things like, hey, give me all the 10K reports that were one of the last 4 reports that were issued by any company in a given SIC code. So this is basically saying, I'm not sure what SIC code this is, but so there were 96 of these filings. So it looks like these some kind of healthcare companies. And so basically it'll just give you a list of all of those. So it allows you to basically be able to search on reports, do things like what are the 10 most recent filings that were filed with the SEC. So it can give you that information. So you can see the date filed, 2013, which is today, obviously. So it can kind of give you that information. So it kind of, if you looked at this, you can download it, you can then look through it, and you can see, you know, by structuring the API in different ways, you can pull this information out, which can make it quite useful for building an application. So that's basically it. You kind of have to really have a play with it. And if you have any questions, then let us know, and we can give you more information. So Michelle, if you want to, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll go back to the main slide.
Yeah, Campbell, thank you. Let me just pull up the other slides if I can. I seem to have lost that on my page here. Okay, well, apologies for that. I can't pull the slide up now. For some reason, I'm unable to access.
Yeah, so I can basically, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, if you could just show the last slide, because I think some people had asked about having access to the link, just wanted to see where the link was to get into the beta. And we did receive one last question about if this was for US GAAP only, and just to I think repeat what Campbell had said earlier. Right now, our database contains US GAAP data. As we add additional data, that data will be accessible using the APIs from our database. But you can use the APIs on other databases that are XBRL formatted because it's available for all of those, for any kind of XBRL content. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining today. We will be sending out a follow-up email, and this webinar has been recorded and will be posted and archived on our website for those of you who want to listen to it again or want to pass it on to colleagues. And as Campbell said, we will be sending, for those who have signed on for the beta, we will be sending you a survey in about a week. and asking you some questions. So please try to use the API in the meantime so that we can get some answers, and it'll give you an opportunity to provide some input to the final APIs that are developed. So with that, thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you on one of our next webinars.